Today's guest is Dr. Anthony Rafferty. He's a medical doctor as well as holding a PhD in marine biology. He's passionate about improving gut microbiome health through nutrition and lifestyle. Anthony believes that when the gut microbiome is properly cared for, it has the ability to prevent, treat, and sometimes reverse common chronic illnesses. He studied for 15 years in higher education, achieved 4 degrees, and spent almost a decade in academic clinical research. He's won multiple awards for his research and clinical work and contributed to over 25 scientific publications and over 30 conferences on a national and international scale. He's currently training in general practice and actively involved in microbiome research and education. Anthony, welcome to the show.
It's so good to be able to chat to you. Thanks so much for the invite to be able to be here.
Yeah, it's great. You're welcome. And because I met you on Instagram, well, I saw you on Instagram, I should say. It was only a few weeks ago. And I was looking at, I follow Doctor's Kitchen on Instagram, and I was looking at his stories, and he reposted something that you'd posted about one of his podcasts.
Yes.
And so I decided to just click your name, and I saw, you're the good gut doctor, and I just sort of skimmed through your posts a bit, and I thought, oh, this is really good. I must have him on my show.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. And I'm glad that you were finding the posts informative, and you reached out. Thank you.
Yeah, your posts are quite informative because you write a lot, and you really you design your posts to be really informative, even if people don't read what you've written, just even the pictures that you put, you sort of put the points up really clearly. And I just find, your account is very informative. I think it's really good.
Oh, thank you so much. I do work quite hard on it. It's a lot of work actually goes into doing it. I didn't realize before I got involved. But I found I was quite passionate about the story I was trying to tell on Instagram. And, each of my posts, they're very thought out in the sense that I want to provide people with as much evidence-based, scientific background behind kind of nutrition and lifestyle change and the impact that can have on their gut microbiome as a central focus, and just as a method of improving well-being generally,
Yeah. And because gut health, it seems to be sort of talked about a lot these days, compared to even 10 years ago. We didn't really hear anything about gut health, microbiome, all that stuff. And now it's in the mainstream, it's everywhere, which is really good. But I think also I'm not sure if everyone knows enough about it and to know what to do about it. Yeah. Hence, I've got you on my show.
Yeah. Well, I think you're very right. It has become quite a hot topic, really.
Yeah.
The gut and gut health, generally speaking. And I think I'm very excited about that because I think it gets people talking about it. But unfortunately, there's a downside to that too, because you do get a lot of people kind of jumping on the gut health bandwagon to kind of try and make some money because if people can buy products and bits and pieces to improve their gut health, if something's really well marketed, it can sell, obviously, because people are going to want to buy it to improve their well-being and their gut health. So I think it's really important to try and take some of those things with a pinch of salt and do a little bit of research yourself, or follow people on Instagram. There are a few brilliant accounts that give some good, solid, science-based backing to various different things to do with your gut health. I think I'm really excited that it has become a major kind of area that people are trying to improve on, because I really do think that the health of our gut has a direct knock-on effect on our body and our well-being. I do think it plays a central role in kind of the occurrence of disease and how we kind of cope with that, So it's exciting to get people talking, but it's just about choosing to listen to the right things.
Yeah. So what would you say about improving gut health? what steps could people just on an everyday basis take?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it would take just a little bit of discussion surrounding what the gut or gut health actually is. And so my aim, or the aim of my page, is it focuses in on microbiome health.
Yeah.
And essentially what the microbiome is, it is a collection of the bugs that live in a certain kind of part of your body and the genetic material that they have. So basically they have lots of genes and DNA and things like that going on, that essentially they can help to break down or ferment different food products, and they produce byproducts or metabolites, or these healthy little molecules that then go on and do other things.
Yeah.
So essentially those little things can either be really beneficial for us, they can be beneficial for our gut itself, they affect other organisms that are living in the gut, they can affect the gut lining, and they can go into the bloodstream and kind of go around our body and affect other things like our mental health and well-being. So that's why it's really quite important. Now, what is quite interesting is all over the body we have lots of different microbiomes. So you can have like a microbiome that's different under your armpit compared to the one that's in your nose. And all these different kind of little communities are made up of lots of different types of bugs, different species of bugs, and different kind of groups of bugs in all these different locations. So, but they're most densely populated in the gut. So that's why I refer to the gut microbiome quite a lot on my page, because that's the most densely populated one. There's trillions of different types of bugs there. And because when you think of that, like trillions, that's mad to think that many little organisms living in our gut. But what's really quite fascinating is if we actually look at all the kind of genetic material in our body, including bacterial and all of the other different genetic components made up in different bugs in our bodies, about 10% of that is human and 90% of it is bugs. So when you kind of start to look at it like that, you kind of think, are we just like walking bug factories basically? I love looking at it like that because it kind of gives people an insight into the impact that the bug community in our body can actually have on us as humans.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating about the gut bugs specifically is that the majority of them tend to live in our large intestine.
Yeah.
And what happens is when we eat food, during its kind of transit through the stomach and the small intestine, those locations higher up, you kind of get absorption of kind of minerals and vitamins and this, that, and the other. Mm-hmm. And then you get things that go down to the large intestine, and the bugs that live in the microbiome down there, they kind of gobble them up and they ferment things to produce these wonderful little metabolites.
Right.
Now, the thing about the microbiome is the main source of food for the gut bugs is fiber. Yeah. And that's kind of, fiber is a complex carbohydrate, which basically doesn't get broken down or processed in the upper part of the digestive system. It waits until it gets down to our large intestine where the gut bugs break it down.
Okay.
And the problem is with a kind of Western culture, we eat a lot of processed foods, highly refined foods that are very poor in fiber content. So essentially they're kind of broken down much higher up in the digestive system, and we're essentially starving our gut bugs because the foods that we're eating don't have an awful lot of fiber in them. And you start to get kind of like die off of various species, and you just get a reduced diversity of the type of bugs that are living down there. And that essentially is what contributes to kind of poor gut function and can lead on to more kind of chronic disease occurrence.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I think I just wanted to touch on those things because I think it's really important to know what they eat. Yeah. So essentially what we put in our mouth is basically determining how our gut bugs are functioning and how diverse that kind of microbiome is. Now, the major source of fiber is in plants, essentially.
Yeah.
So feeding your gut bugs requires you eating complex carbohydrates from plants. And plants, basically, when I refer to plants, I mean kind of vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, seeds. It's from all different types of plant-based products.
Right, yeah.
We know that increasing the diversity or the number of different types of plant in the diet basically directly impacts the gut microbiome by increasing the diversity of the gut bugs there.
Yeah.
There was a fascinating study called the American Gut Health Project that came out a couple of years ago, where they did a population-wide investigation of the gut microbiome, and they found that people who ate 30 or more types of plant a week, they had the most diverse microbiome. So we know that basically people who eat more plants, 30 or more species of plants a week, has a better diversity in the microbiome. And we know that then if you have more of a diversity in your microbiome, because you've more different types of bugs living in there, they can function differently. So you get more function in a better and more diverse microbiome.
Yeah. So when you say 30 or more plant-based food, like that sounds quite a lot, but it's not just like vegetables or fruit, is it? You mentioned nuts and seeds are included in that.
Yeah. So anything that essentially can be grown from a plant source. So, you know, when I first heard this and I was trying to improve my microbiome, I thought, how am I going to get to 30? That's ridiculous. But it's actually quite funny, because what I encourage kind of my patients to do, or when I'm speaking to people or advise them on the microbiome, is to just get a blank piece of paper and, you know, at the start of the week, pop it on the countertop with a pen and write down any new fruit or vegetable or nut or seed or legume or any of these things that you're eating during the week. Just pop it down on your list, and it includes beans and all of these things too. And you'd be quite surprised at how quickly the kind of count can build up. So like in dinner, if you're having like a bit of garlic and onion mixed in with some broccoli or a bit of a veggie stir fry, you're kind of already dealing with about 6 or 8 different types of plant there.
Also the garlic counts as well, garlic juice.
So like all the different types of plant will count towards your balance for the week. And I generally encourage people to kind of start assessing how that goes for them and just try and increase the diversity there. So because we know that, you know, diet has a huge role to play in how our gut functions. And essentially with every meal that we have, we can influence the gut microbiome. We can influence the bugs that are there, because essentially when food goes into our mouth, when it gets to the large intestine, the little bugs have to work a way to ferment it. So we can kind of dictate which bugs are flourishing and which bugs are kind of going to the wayside or not there in higher abundance. And one lovely thing about that is that obviously if we're eating the right foods, we can promote the good bugs. But if we're not eating the right foods, or engaging kind of other behaviors that kind of promote a negative growth of bugs that aren't so good, they can tend to flourish and suppress the good bugs. So, you know, I think I really try to empower my patients, empower people to kind of think about everything they're putting into their mouth, because it has a really significant effect. And, you know, this old kind of term of you are what you eat, it's very much true. You know. So I suppose from a food point of view, I'd always recommend diversifying your plant intake. That's the main thing I'd recommend for people. And then with regard to animal products, you know, a lot of the studies have shown moving towards a more Mediterranean style diet or a more plant-based diet is much better for you than kind of consuming a diet that's very high in animal-based products. And I think specifically meat, red meat, can have a very detrimental effect on the gut microbiome, because there is something called carnitine in red meat that actually, it can be converted by some of your kind of not so friendly gut bugs into something called TMAO. Right. And essentially that can go on and have a negative impact on your heart, cardiovascular health. It can affect your blood vessels. And the heme iron in red meat as well can be quite inflammatory to the gut bugs as well. So we know that things like that can kind of promote like this kind of low grade chronic grumbling inflammation in the body. It can increase your risk of colon cancer. And that's specific to red meat. So I tend to advise my patients to move more towards a Mediterranean style diet, or towards a more plant-based diet. But I think it's mainly, the main thing is that they kind of try and are conscious about the number of plants they're consuming. Because everybody's going to make different dietary choices that's right for them and their families, you know. And I think it's really important to work with people to kind of optimize and diversify the plants that are going in, despite kind of other dietary choices that they may find hard to change initially, you know?
Yeah. And just one quick question back to the 30 different types per week. Does that also include some of these spices and herbs as well? Like if you think turmeric powder, because that comes from a root.
Yes. So it includes herbs and spices as well. And, you know, herbs and spices can be an amazing way to increase diversity in your diet, because, you know, they add so much flavor to whole foods, and, you know, they're easy to grow at home as well. So you can get fresh herbs. And I just really love including those. And they can count towards your kind of plant points, a lot of people call it now, for the week. And, you know, eating a diet that's rich in these whole foods and these fiber-rich kind of foods, spices and herbs are just brilliant way to kind of really improve your health and improve the microbiome health.
That's great. And I think that makes it easier, because initially people might hear 30 and it does sound a bit overwhelming. But when you know that so much is included in the 30, probably pretty easy.
Well, that's the thing, you know. I think we all have a habit of going into the supermarket and picking up the same 5 things that we cook with every week. And, you know, one thing I challenge people to do is every time they go into the supermarket, have a little look around and think, actually, why don't I just try something new, like a new fruit or a new vegetable or a new type of bean, or perhaps you don't usually use things like lentils. So you swap out, perhaps in a bolognese, you put in lentils instead, as that kind of bulked up texture. So it's just about making really simple little swaps to kind of include new things in the diet. And, you know, those simple changes can really add up over time. And it can really improve your health and well-being in the long term. And I think it's an amazing thing to do, but it's important to just be very conscious of it, you know, when you go into the supermarket and you're doing your shop.
And then talking about shopping in the supermarkets, they're so full of these probiotic drinks and things like that, which people had started buying. I think for quite a few years, we used to see the adverts on the TV, and we've heard that probiotics are good for the gut, and people are probably buying all sorts of different drinks. And then recently I've heard the word prebiotic. So there's like 2 different things, probiotic and prebiotic. Can you tell us the difference?
Yes, of course. It can be quite confusing, actually. So, like I said to you, our gut bugs that live in our microbiome, in our gut, they like fiber. So there are certain types of fiber that are indigestible, obviously, to humans. We can't do it ourselves. We need the gut bugs to actually break these down. And certain types of fiber, which we can't break down, but our gut bugs can, they are broken down by specific bugs we know that are beneficial for our health. And if a food has the ability to kind of increase the number of these good bacteria specific to the breakdown of that food, that fiber contained in the food is called a prebiotic fiber. Right. So prebiotics are essentially fiber-rich foods that specifically target the growth of good bacteria.
Okay.
So that's where you'll hear that term a lot, because certain things like Jerusalem artichoke, leek, tomatoes, chicory, all of these things in kind of scientific research have shown that those types of foods can promote the growth of beneficial bacteria. So that's why they're termed prebiotic.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Whereas probiotic, that's actually the term that's used to describe the bugs themselves. Oh. So a probiotic is a gut bug that's living naturally in your gut. Now, you can also take probiotics, and essentially what you're taking in there is a little capsule that's containing lots of little live bugs. Mm-hmm. So essentially the kind of aim that a lot of those probiotic supplements have is to essentially say, you know, taking these good gut bugs in this tablet will boost your gut health, essentially. So just to break that down, a prebiotic is the food that you give to a probiotic.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So prebiotics are essentially good fibers that you feed to your probiotics, which are your gut bugs.
So should people take these together, or does it matter?
Well, so because we know that prebiotics have a beneficial effect on us, that we know that they promote, by definition, they promote the growth of good bugs. I would recommend definitely the inclusion of prebiotics in your diet. Now, there are various different supplements that you can also get, such as things like psyllium husk, inulin, other things such as partially hydrolyzed guar gum. These are a couple of kind of supplements that you might see on the market from a prebiotic point of view. Now, the thing about prebiotics is that some people who have maybe a gut that's not functioning quite right, there's a little bit of imbalance going on between the good and the bad gut bugs that are living there. Those folks tend to have a little bit of difficulty digesting dietary fibers. So when you're increasing, say, a prebiotic component in your diet, or you go out and buy a prebiotic supplement that you choose to take, some people may actually get a little bit of bloating and a bit of tummy upset because their gut bugs just aren't used to this increased fiber content. So there's been some research done looking at that because, you know, it's a bit of a catch-22. You want to increase the beneficial things that you know are going to promote the good bugs in your gut. Yeah. So that's the things like dietary fiber from complex carbohydrates, and that's increasing your prebiotic content in your food. But of course, if those things are triggering you and you're getting kind of bloating and things like that, you have to be kind of very mindful about how you include those things in your diet. And generally speaking, research suggests that you start with very low quantities and you do it slowly over time. So instead of just trying to decide that you're going to eat tons of prebiotic food or just immediately introduce all this new dietary fiber you weren't really eating before, or a new prebiotic supplement, you're better off starting with small quantities and to train your gut. So essentially, you're training those bugs there to be able to increase the tolerance with which they can break down or ferment those fibers.
Right.
But that's what I'd recommend from a prebiotic point of view, is just to start very slowly. Have a little kind of, I love to encourage people to keep a little diary as to kind of if they're getting symptoms from food, what foods are triggering them. And essentially build things like that up slowly in the diet, over kind of spaced out over time. Yeah. Now with probiotics, I think they have had a wonderful role in the media and things like that as being these kind of silver bullets for treating all ailments, and they're incredibly well marketed. And, you know, I do think that probiotics do play a role in kind of helping with gut healing and promoting kind of good gut health. But I think you need to be quite particular about what you're choosing to take. And that can be quite hard because, you know, clinical research is really diving into kind of the role of probiotics for very many conditions at the moment. And it's coming out that there's limited evidence in certain conditions, whereas in others they may benefit, you know. So essentially there's a few different things that you can kind of take probiotics for. But generally a lot of the literature suggests that you should take a probiotic that's been proven in clinical trials to benefit in that condition. Yeah. And a lot of people kind of maybe could consider including a probiotic if they had symptoms consistent with the condition that they were experiencing. And, you know, a lot of people who go out and are actually quite healthy and have a healthy gut microbiome and have no symptoms, but just take probiotics, they may not actually be doing anything in your gut. So it could be kind of like money down the drain in those circumstances. You know? Are
you actually referring to supplements here, not things like the drinks or yogurt kefirs and things?
Yeah, so this is from a supplement point of view. That's a probiotic supplement. But with regard to, and it's lovely that you've touched on it actually, I think it's amazing to get your probiotics from obviously natural sources. So as well as your prebiotic things, I know you can go out and buy all these supplements and this, that, and the other, but it is lovely to get your prebiotics and your probiotics from natural sources. So probiotics are naturally rich in things like fermented foods. Yeah. So I tend to I do my own kind of sauerkraut at home, my own kimchi, my own kombucha, and things like kefir, like milk kefir, water kefir, all of these things, basically through the fermentation process, which involves basically bacteria breaking down various little sugar molecules in the fermented food that you're working with. You get the promotion of different probiotic bugs within the product. Now, the problem is, from a science point of view, is it's early days with regard to the research that's going on with a lot of this stuff. There is some evidence behind kefir and a little bit behind the benefits of kimchi. I think there have been some studies looking at the intake of fermented foods and longevity or long life. And it would suggest that there is an association between those things in Asian cultures. So that's really quite nice. And yeah, so that's generally where I try to get a lot of my probiotics from, is by fermenting things at home. And I'm sure once kind of clinical trials start to get done on these things, we'll see more and more evidence to kind of support these foods in our diet.
Right. And can I ask you one question? What's the difference between a yogurt kefir and a live yogurt? Are there different bacteria in there?
So sometimes you can get different bacteria in different. So essentially, sometimes with the live yogurts, they may kind of culture them with different bacteria. So with certain yogurts, you can get different bacteria living and thriving in those, you know. Now, generally speaking, like dairy can come with its own impact on the microbiome and on our own cells with regard to hormonal regulation, everything like that. So I would tend to move more towards things like water kefir and kombucha, which uses kind of green and black teas and various things like that. But if you are eating dairy, and dairy is something that's included in your diet, obviously I'd recommend kind of keeping your dairy intake to a minimum if that's the case. But if you are doing it, using things like live yogurts and kefir can be a good addition, more so than just having dairy alone, you know?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And what other things can we do diet-wise? Is there anything else we could do to help our gut?
Well, the main things that I would recommend are the plant diversity, which we touched on, including fermented foods, which is absolutely brilliant. And then from a lifestyle point of view, I think there's a lot of things that can be done. So we know now that our gut microbiome kind of works on this circadian rhythm, which we work on ourselves. So this kind of light and dark cycle, you know. So, you know, getting good sleep and allowing your bugs the time to actually get themselves organized, have a bit of a break from having to process all this food we're continuously shoving down our guts, which is generally a part of Western society. A lot of people just eat continuously. We don't actually give our gut or gut bugs a break at all. So getting some good sleep in there and kind of eating with the natural circadian rhythm of the day can really have an impact. I think staying really well hydrated as well, and things like exercise. We're seeing amazing research coming out with regard to the impact of exercise on the gut microbiome. And generally speaking, you know, we can improve the presence of certain gut bugs that we think now are actually anti-inflammatory and have a really good impact on kind of whether or not we're overweight or obese, and those things, and what type of carbohydrates we can actually break down as well. So there's a lovely kind of a couple of really lovely trials that have come out in athletes and ultra athletes actually, that are showing varying effects of exercise on the microbiome. But generally speaking, outside of that, if someone comes into me and says, you know, what can I do? I just encourage them to get moving. So even if you get up and get out for, say, a couple of minutes walk, even up to half an hour a day, that's going to have a positive impact. And then, of course, things like increasing your aerobic fitness, resistance training, all these things are going to have a really good impact on our body, our mental health, and on our gut health as well.
Right. Oh, how about fasting? Do you know anything about fasting or time-restricted eating? Does that help?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different ways that people fast, generally speaking. So one thing that was very popular a wee while ago was this 5-2 fasting, where people were kind of eating normally within 5-day window and then restricting the calories right down to a couple of hundred calories essentially for 2 days a week. Now it seems that popularity has actually kind of increased in this kind of 16-8 or kind of time restricted fasting, where people are kind of eating within, say, a 16-hour, or they're eating within an 8-hour window and then fasting for 16 hours. And then, of course, other people go on and do really long fasts, which could last a couple of days out of the month, or there's really extreme fasting as well that has gone on in other communities. Essentially, the research shows that there is a positive impact on certain types of fasting on the gut microbiome, and essentially you're giving them a rest, so they're not like overworking themselves into exhaustion essentially. And there have been studies that have shown that this kind of time-restricted eating can have a significant impact and improve gut microbiome diversity and function. So, you know, you have to kind of work out what's right for you, though. And that's one thing I would say. Essentially, I've spoken to some women that at varying stages of their menstrual cycles, intermittent fasting might work for them at some stages, but not at other stages. And then again, you have to be very kind of cautious in some situations that, you know, when you're eating, say, during an 8-hour window, essentially you're not eating as many calories as you would if you were eating from the minute you got up in the morning to going to bed, which a lot of us do. So that kind of calorie restriction people find beneficial for kind of weight loss and kind of controlling their weight. But with a reduction in calories, sometimes we see that it can impact hormonal regulation, and a caloric deficit can kind of impact kind of the menstrual cycle and impact fertility in women and things like that. So some women get on absolutely great and they're not restricting their caloric intake to the extent where that's going to be an issue. Whereas other women, you know, they can be quite sensitive to kind of calorie in, calorie out, which, you know, I try to move away from that whole concept of calorie in, calorie out, because I think it's much more complex than that. And our gut microbiome has a massive role in how we process food. But for those reasons, I would kind of say, you know, feel it out, see what works for you from a restricted eating point of view. And, you know, some people thrive on eating just 8 hours a day. Whereas, you know, I find that after, say, about 14 hours, I'm ready to eat again. So I tend to do between 12, 14 hours overnight. And then I just eat my breakfast a little bit later. And then just eat your normal intake during the day. Now, the thing is, it works really well with the primarily plant-based diet because plants don't have as many calories as animal products do. So when it comes down to patients who come into me that primarily have a plant-based diet, they can tend to eat much more and they're quite satiated and happy with the complex carbs they're taking in from kind of all the different plant-based products. Whereas folks that kind of eat a lot of animal-based products, they're taking in much larger calorie counts within that, but they're not staying as full from those calories. So it's about just kind of working with your gut and what kind of works for you in the long term, you know?
I just wanted to ask, what about like psychological factors like stress, for example? Does that have an effect on gut microbiome?
Oh, absolutely. And this is one thing that I really speak to my patients an awful lot about. And, you know, I think we know intuitively stress isn't good for us. And, you know, like when you're speaking to your friends or family, everybody's going, no, you need to not stress as much. But it's very hard when you're actually in the bubble of your work environment or whatever kind of stressful circumstance you might find yourself in. But essentially what happens is our body perceives stress as a threat to ourselves, basically. Now, I was listening to some fantastic podcasts and reading some really great research about this. You know, back in the day, you know, when stress was an amazing trigger for us, because if we were in immediate danger, say as getting eaten by a tiger or something while you're strolling around the plains, you needed to activate this fight or flight mode in your body. And, you know, so you get this kind of production of all these hormones that kind of ramp you up and want to get you going, essentially. So you kind of want to do a runner. But generally speaking, from a modern day point of view, a lot of the evidence is showing that day-to-day triggers can cause that trigger now in our fight or flight mode, that our bodies aren't great at kind of distinguishing between an impending doom of a car hitting us or something like that, and these kind of things that we perceive as being very stressful events, like a circumstance that might happen at work or whatever. So I think our body thinks either way, activate the fight or flight, we need to get this going here, you know. So you get a really big kind of surge of things like adrenaline, and then you get surges of cortisol. And these are kind of hormones that are linked to stress, which keep you kind of revved up or amped up to kind of keep you in that state of constant vigilance as to kind of how you're going to manage this stress, you know. And when we're working in stressful environments or putting ourselves in these constant stressful positions, you have this underlying stress response going on continuously, you know. And when you're kind of in this state of stress, it can really dampen down our immune response. It can dampen down our gut bug functioning, you know, and, you know, circulating adrenaline and cortisol. It can really, you know, stress hormones can really impact our gut microbiome.
Yeah.
And it can, when you're kind of impacting so greatly on the immune system as well, you can really open yourself up to kind of this low grade inflammation and this grumbling unhappiness in your gut and in the body in general. And, you know, that's why kind of when you're going through these really stressful periods, you kind of get into these cycles where your hormones are kind of surging through your body, your gut isn't happy. And a lot of us feel that kind of stress and anxiety in our gut. So, you know, when you're not feeling quite right, you're really stressful, you're kind of thinking, God, my tummy feels a bit off, you know, because there's been a fascinating link between the brain and the gut.
Yeah.
So our brain, it's our brain, it sits in our skull. But there's also this really complex nervous system that exists within our gut. And people or scientists refer to it as our second brain.
Yeah.
So essentially we have our brain and our second brain. And there's about 500 million nerve endings in our gut, which is mad to actually think that that's the case. And all of those little nerves, they feed back to kind of this motorway called the vagus nerve. And that attaches or links back into our brain. So there's this constant bidirectional flow back and forth of information between our brain and our gut. You know? And then on top of that, then you have the immune system. And 70% of our immune system actually lives in our gut. We have something called gut-associated lymphoid tissue, which basically sits just outside the gut lining. Yeah. And, you know, so the gut microbiome and our immune function and our kind of brain function, our nervous system function, they all speak to each other and they're all so intimately intertwined. And when we become stressed and you're kind of, you have all of this stress going on in your body, these hormones circulating around your body, of course it's going to impact your gut microbiome, your immune system and your mental health. Yeah. So I think, you know, it's really hard to tease these things out, but it's really important to realize that unless we kind of develop strategies to manage our stress, you're going to have an impact on those major systems as you move forward in life. And I think one thing that I really, really learned was starting to do daily meditation practices to kind of quiet the mind and getting involved in yoga. They were such game changers for how I processed my stress and how I actually dealt with stress, you know? Yeah. And I think the more that you become resilient to those forces or those stressful environments, the better you're going to function from a mental health point of view, the better your gut is going to function. And they're all just so intertwined. Yeah. Your immune function is going to be better. So I think it's really important as part of a gut health plan is to incorporate kind of stress reduction method, you know?
Yeah, whatever types of relaxation exercises that you like would be really good.
Exactly, yeah. And like simple breathing techniques can work wonders, you know. Like I kind of encourage people to even start off with, you can get an app, like there's loads of apps you can get online. I love the Awesome Breathing app. Because you just look at the screen and a dot on the screen goes big and small again, and you just follow it with your breath. And, you know, I encourage people to even just do that for 3 minutes twice a day. That's 6 minutes out of your day, you know. And after a couple of weeks, you really start to notice a difference. And, you know, I used to find that meditating was such a chore for me. I used to absolutely go mad when I sat down to meditate because my brain was so busy. I thought I was doing a terrible job of it. But I think, you know, as time goes on, it gets easier. No, you're never going to be perfect at it, ever. Like, you know, you'll have good days and bad days, just like doing anything else. But I think the cumulative effect that you can have is phenomenal. And we may not see differences on a day-to-day basis, but I can guarantee you in a month, you can look back and think, oh my God, look how far I've come. Or I handle that situation differently. Or, you know, my gut isn't bothering me as much now. Or I'm in better health. You know, it's fascinating. So it's really important to keep an eye on your milestones when you're moving forward, and really just stop and appreciate where you've come from, you know. And I feel like people don't give themselves enough kudos for these things. But, you know, it's investing in your long-term health and well-being. And people should be really proud of themselves for that.
Yeah, yeah. And things do take time. You're not going to get quick results, but that's okay.
Exactly. And that's the thing about gut health. Although we can see changes within very short period with our gut structures, from as early as a meal, as early as 24 hours in, you're seeing changes in the gut. I think to propagate a really good, robust microbiome, it's about making some kind of dietary and lifestyle changes in the long term, and for it to become a long-term goal. And, you know, I always try to encourage people to, instead of kind of looking at what is this day going to achieve, like I always say, well, what's your ultimate goal of where you want to be? You know, like, what's your ultimate goal? Let's stop looking at the day to day and beating ourselves up over kind of having a pack of crisps or something like that, you know, and focus on the overall goal. Because if someone wants to be in a certain place, or they have a really clear goal in mind of where they want to be, it doesn't become about those day-to-day interactions. They actually start making lifestyle or dietary changes to be that person in the line. And they kind of stop beating themselves up over the small interactions, and it just becomes a habit then over time that, you know, they locked for a healthy fruit choice over a packet of crisps.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I say to people, kind of identify where you want to be in X amount of time and then work towards your goal. And then, you know, if you stumble over a block along the way, that's fine too. Just pick yourself, dust yourself off, and then just get back on your journey.
Yeah. And do you know much about people that get acid reflux? Is that at all connected with gut bacteria?
Yeah, so there can be a few things with regard to reflux. So, you know, acid is produced in our stomach essentially. And people who get reflux, it's just this stomach acid that's kind of coming back up their esophagus or their food tube. And, you know, it can be really quite debilitating for some people. They can get really kind of poor, or like this kind of chronic pain in their chest when they eat certain foods. And it's essentially, you know, the acid or the pH of the acid, it's kind of causing this inflammation and pain as it kind of goes up your esophagus. Now, the thing with that is you have a sphincter, or this kind of little ring of muscle around the base of your esophagus or your food tube. And sometimes if that relaxes, you can kind of get this surge of acid kind of going up. So sometimes if people were suffering from reflux, I'd really encourage them to see their doctor, because it can be a sign that there's something else going on for them there. You know, some people who get kind of reflux and have chronic reflux, they can have a little bug living in their stomach called H. pylori, and that kind of can predispose you to having quite bad reflux, heartburn, but it can also predispose you to having things like ulcers in your stomach. So obviously you don't want an overgrowth of this kind of bug living in your gut. So if you do have reflux, it's worthwhile kind of going and having it looked at. One thing to also realize is that certain foods can trigger reflux for us. And that's really important. And one thing I do see in patients that have come in and kind of chat to me a little bit is that, you know, when you're kind of irritating your stomach or kind of aggravating it, and it's producing a lot of acid in response to certain foods, you kind of have to stop and have a little think to yourself with regard to like what foods you're putting in there, you know. And I think, like I was saying to you, keeping a food diary and having a little look at kind of what's aggravating your gut, like things like alcohol can really cause a lot of reflux, dairy, red meat, again, these kind of things can really be inflammatory and can cause reflux. So it's worthwhile kind of having a little look at that. Sometimes caffeine and certain teas can cause reflux as well, and some people get it with citrus fruits and things. So it's worthwhile kind of keeping a little diary, having a little look at what's going on for you, and kind of assessing what foods are causing it for you. Now, the thing is, you can also get it in response to stress as well. So like we were saying, if you notice that when you're stressed, you're getting really quite bad reflux periods, or you're having this kind of heartburn, it's worthwhile, again, investing in kind of time to manage your stress. Yeah. So they're really important things to do. So keep a little eye on kind of what's triggering it for you. Is it stress? Is it certain foods? Is it alcohol? And then it's about working kind of with your body to kind of figure out what the best approach to take is, you know? Yeah. Because a lot of people, they just turn to Gaviscon, they turn to like protein pump inhibitors and things like that. And you can take them chronically, but sometimes it's masking a symptom, or it's masking a symptom of a cause, you know. Yeah. And you're just kind of putting a Band-Aid on something that could be rectified if you actually take a little closer look at the cause of what's happening. Yeah. And obviously in more kind of significant conditions, when the sphincter isn't working properly at the bottom of the food tube, that can kind of cause reflux. So if you're getting other conditions, or things like food sticking in your throat and all of these things, it's really worthwhile going and speaking to a health professional about that. Yeah. You know, so but first things first, yeah, it's good to kind of keep a little eye, or a bit of a diary, as to what's triggering the symptoms for you, and see whether, you know, if it's things like alcohol, of course, cutting down on things that are going to be not necessarily great for your health. It's going to be of benefit to you. And then again, if it's stress, working with your mindfulness practices or your stress reduction. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, if anyone's got any issues with their gut, they should go and see a doctor.
100%. You know, and a lot of people think it's normal to be feeling the way they do, but I'd really encourage people that, you know, if they're having any issues with kind of reflux, if they're having swallowing issues, and things like that, I'd get them to go and see a doctor. If you're having issues with your bowels, so generally speaking, if you're pooping more than 3 times a day, or if you're pooping less than 3 times a week, if you have a new onset of symptoms, especially if you're older, over say 50 years old, you're getting bloated, you're seeing there's a change in your bowel habits, if there's a change in the colour of your stool, like if it's really dark, tarry looking, or if it's pale or green, and obviously anything like blood or mucus in your stool, you need to be going to see someone immediately.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, sometimes if you've any unexplained weight loss as well, it can be good to kind of have all of these things checked out by a health professional.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for coming on this show. It was great hearing about all the different aspects of gut health and microbiome. It was very useful.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always such a pleasure to be able to talk about these things. I love talking about good health, and I'm really hoping that your listeners found it useful in some way. And of course, if they want to see any further information or bits and pieces, I'm on Instagram as Good Gut Doc. So it's GOODGUTDOC. And I don't tend to use Facebook or Twitter much, so Instagram's my main protocol.
And I would recommend following Anthony on this page, because I've been following you, and you do really give out good information.
Oh, thank you so much.
Detailed information.
Good. It's mainly just to try and empower people, just to give them tools, not just from a nutrition point of view, but also just lifestyle bits and pieces, like various different lifestyle practices that can make a huge difference to your health. And of course, obviously, because plant diversity is such a huge thing for microbiome health, I pop up lots of plant-based recipes that cater to people who are celiac and this, that and the other, various other intolerances. So if anybody wants any recipe ideas or anything like that, they're all there as well.
Yeah, I've noted, I was looking through your recipes earlier on today as well, and kind of found some really tempting ones. I'm thinking, good, that looks good.
Well, it can be hard. It can be hard when you try to increase the plants in your diet. When I first kind of mainly went plant-based, oh my God, I found it so difficult to cook. It was like a whole new cooking area for me. I had no idea what tastes went together. Now that was many years ago that I kind of went down that road, it'd be 6 or 7 years ago now. So I think if I can help people with just the staples that I go to all the time, are tasty and just easy to cook, if it helps, that's brilliant.
That's great. Thank you very much.
No bother. Thank you so much, Najma, and I'll talk to you again soon. Have a lovely evening.
You too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Wellbeing in the Kingdom. If you've enjoyed, learned from, or been inspired or empowered by today's episode, then please help to support the show by leaving a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts.